The airport buzzed with its familiar cacophony, the rhythmic clatter of luggage wheels, the animated chatter of travelers hurrying to their gates, and the distant hum of flight announcements echoing through the terminal. Bright lights bounced off the polished floors, and the PA system called out final boarding calls for flights departing to destinations around the globe. In the midst of this lively crowd, an 11-year-old boy named Ethan Johnson walked confidently toward Gate 23, clutching his small backpack like a prized possession. This journey was not just any trip for Ethan. It was his first time flying alone. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he took in the vibrant atmosphere. Little did he realize that this flight would become not just a journey through the skies, but also a profound lesson in courage and resilience. Beside him walked his father, Michael Johnson, a tall, composed man dressed in a neat but simple suit. To onlookers, he appeared to be an ordinary businessman, but Michael was anything but typical. He was the owner of the airline Ethan was about to board. Having built his empire through hard work and humility, he was well acquainted with responsibility. Today, however, he wasn't there as a businessman. He was simply a proud father, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension as he prepared to send his son off on this new adventure. As Michael knelt to meet Ethan at eye level, his expression was warm yet firm. "Remember, son," he advised, "be polite, stay calm, and if you need anything, just ask the flight attendants. They're there to help you." Ethan nodded eagerly, his excitement bubbling over. "I'll be fine, Dad. You'll see." "You'll do great, buddy," Michael replied with a smile. "Enjoy the view from the window. You've got this." Ethan grinned widely, feeling a rush of confidence as he hugged his father one last time before heading toward the gate. Michael watched him walk away, a proud smile on his face, but a flicker of worry passed through his mind as he thought about the journey ahead. Ethan, a boy filled with enthusiasm, felt a surge of excitement as he prepared to board the plane for his first solo flight. He was eager to take on this new experience, ready to explore the world from above. His father, Michael, stood by his side, offering encouragement and guidance. As they approached the boarding gate, Ethan's heart raced with anticipation of the adventure that awaited him. Michael leaned down to give his son one last piece of advice. "Just remember to be polite and keep your cool, no matter what happens," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "And if anything goes wrong, don't hesitate to reach out to the flight attendants. They are here to help you." Ethan nodded enthusiastically, his eyes sparkling with confidence. "I'll be just fine, Dad, I promise," he replied, unable to contain his excitement. As Michael observed Ethan's eagerness, he felt a mix of pride and concern. He knew that flying alone could be daunting for a young boy, but he had faith in his son's ability to handle the situation. The bond between father and son was evident, and Michael hoped that this experience would not only be a thrilling adventure for Ethan, but also a valuable lesson in independence and responsibility. As Ethan stepped onto the plane, a sense of wonder filled him. He was greeted warmly by the flight attendants, who noticed his youthful enthusiasm. Excitedly, he handed over his boarding pass and was escorted to his window seat in the economy class. The view of the tarmac below captivated him. He could hardly wait to see the clouds from above and feel the thrill of takeoff. However, this moment of joy would soon be overshadowed by the presence of another passenger. Among those boarding was a middle-aged woman named Carol, who strode down the aisle with an air of entitlement, her perfectly styled hair bobbing with each step. As she approached her assigned seat, her demeanor shifted dramatically upon spotting Ethan quietly flipping through the pages of his book. Her expression turned from neutral to visibly displeased. Carol's lips tightened as she glanced at her boarding pass, hoping for a different seat assignment. "This can't be right," she muttered under her breath. After a moment of hesitation, she waved over a flight attendant, her irritation palpable. "Excuse me," she said, holding up her ticket. "There's been some mistake. I can't sit here." The flight attendant, a friendly young woman, checked Carol's ticket and confirmed that she was indeed in the correct seat. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is your assigned seat," she explained politely. "The flight is fully booked, so we don't have any other options available." Carol's face hardened, her frustration mounting. "You're telling me I have to sit next to him?" she demanded, gesturing sharply toward Ethan, who looked up with a confused but polite smile. Around them, other passengers began to take notice of the unfolding scene. Their curiosity piqued. Whispers flitted through the cabin as people exchanged glances, sensing the tension building between Carol and the young boy. Ethan, excited for his first flight, felt his enthusiasm wane under the weight of the woman's disdain, leaving him to wonder what he had done to provoke such hostility. As the flight attendant confirmed Carol's seat assignment, her frustration boiled over. "I need a different seat," she insisted, her tone sharp. "I can't possibly sit next to him." She gestured toward Ethan, who was still quietly reading his book, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. The flight attendant, maintaining her professionalism, replied gently, "Ma'am, I assure you that this is your assigned seat. Unfortunately, we are fully booked, and there are no alternatives available." Carol's face flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable," she exclaimed, her voice rising enough to draw the attention of other passengers. "I want to speak to someone in charge. I shouldn't have to deal with this." Ethan, sensing the tension in the air, looked up from his book and offered a timid smile. "Hi, ma'am," he said softly, hoping to diffuse the situation, but Carol turned away from him, her eyes narrowing in disdain. Around them, passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads at Carol's behavior while others looked at Ethan with sympathy. Whispers of disapproval rippled through the cabin as people began to murmur among themselves. Ethan's excitement for the flight began to fade, replaced by a sense of unease, as he felt the weight of Carol's judgment bearing down on him. As the cabin filled with the sounds of murmuring passengers, Carol continued to insist that she couldn't sit next to Ethan, claiming vague personal reasons that did little to justify her actions. The flight attendant, attempting to remain calm, reiterated that there were no other seats available, but Carol's frustration only grew. "Honestly, how hard can this be?" Carol snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I paid good money for this ticket, and I shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling increasingly small and unwelcome. He remembered his father's advice to be polite and calm, but how could he remain composed when faced with such hostility? The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension, and it was clear that the drama was only just beginning. As Carol continued her tirade, the atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly strained. Passengers around her were visibly uncomfortable, exchanging glances and murmuring amongst themselves. Some shook their heads, clearly disapproving of Carol's behavior, while others leaned in to whisper supportively to Ethan. A middle-aged man seated a few rows behind Carol cleared his throat, his voice firm but calm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, directing his attention to Carol. "You're making a scene over nothing. The kid is just sitting there reading a book." Carol whipped her head around, her expression a mix of surprise and indignation. "Are you seriously telling me how to feel?" she retorted, her voice rising defensively. The man shrugged, maintaining his composure. "I'm just saying that maybe you should reconsider how you're treating him. This isn't a good look for you." Several passengers murmured in agreement, their sympathy clearly leaning toward Ethan, who remained silent but felt a flicker of hope at the support he was receiving. A woman seated across the aisle leaned closer to the flight attendant, whispering, "That boy hasn't done anything wrong. Why is she acting like this?" As Carol continued to insist that she couldn't sit next to Ethan, the flight attendant tried her best to de-escalate the situation. "I understand this is frustrating, but I assure you that Ethan has been nothing but polite. He's just a child trying to enjoy his flight," she said, her tone steady and reassuring. Carol rolled her eyes, her irritation unabated. "That's what they always say. Just wait until the plane takes off," she replied dismissively, crossing her arms defiantly. Ethan, overhearing her words, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had hoped for an enjoyable flight, but now the atmosphere felt heavy with judgment and hostility. Despite the discomfort, he remembered his father's advice to remain calm and composed. He gripped his book a little tighter, determined not to let Carol's unkindness ruin his adventure. Passengers around them continued to take notice, their disapproval of Carol growing as they whispered amongst themselves. The tension in the cabin escalated, and it became clear that this was more than just a misunderstanding. It was a moment that would test not only Ethan's composure but also the collective decency of everyone on board. As the situation escalated, the flight attendant decided it was time to involve the captain. She discreetly made her way toward the front of the plane, her demeanor calm despite the tension in the cabin. Meanwhile, Carol sat rigidly in her seat, her arms crossed defiantly, still muttering complaints under her breath. In first class, Michael Johnson, Ethan's father, was reviewing work on his tablet when a lead flight attendant approached him with a serious expression. She explained the unfolding situation in hushed tones, and Michael's calm demeanor shifted to one of concern. He put down his tablet and nodded, understanding that the matter required his attention. "Please take me to the back," he instructed, his voice steady and authoritative. As he made his way toward the economy section, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Passengers turned their heads, recognizing the owner of the airline, and a sense of curiosity spread through the rows. Michael was not just a businessman. He was a father who deeply cared about his son's well-being. As he approached Ethan's row, he noticed his son's discomfort and the tension surrounding him. Without a moment's hesitation, Michael knelt down beside Ethan and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Hey, champ," he said softly, trying to comfort his son amidst the chaos. Ethan looked up, his face lighting up with relief at his father's presence. Just then, Carol's irritation turned to confusion as she realized who Michael was. "Oh great, another airline employee," she thought, her mind racing as she prepared to defend herself. Michael straightened up and turned to face Carol, his expression calm but firm. "I'm with the airline, and I've been made aware of the situation," he said, his voice steady. "I'd like to understand why you felt the need to single out my son." Carol opened her mouth to speak, but before she could respond, the atmosphere in the cabin was charged with anticipation. Passengers leaned in, eager to hear how the confrontation would unfold. Michael's authoritative presence commanded respect, and even those who had remained silent before now seemed ready to support Ethan. As the weight of the moment settled in, it became clear that the dynamic had shifted. Carol was no longer just confronting a child, she was facing the owner of the airline, and the stakes had just been raised. As Michael stood before Carol, the tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the hostility that had been directed at Ethan. "I want to understand what led you to feel uncomfortable sitting next to my son," he stated, his voice steady but infused with authority. Carol, taken aback by Michael's presence, stammered momentarily. I didn't mean any harm. It was just, well, I didn't expect to sit next to a child like him," she said, her voice faltering as the weight of her words hung in the air. Around them, passengers began to murmur in disapproval. An older woman seated across the aisle leaned forward, her tone sharp as she interjected. "You judged him the moment you saw him, didn't you? That boy hasn't done anything wrong." Another man chimed in, nodding toward Ethan. "Exactly. He's been nothing but polite throughout this flight. You're the one making a scene here." Carol glanced around, her face reddening as she realized that the tide of support had shifted decisively in Ethan's favor. Michael met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "Prejudice and assumptions have no place on my airline or anywhere else for that matter," he declared, making it clear that this behavior would not be tolerated. Ethan, who had been silently observing the exchange, felt a rush of pride at his father's defense. He had expected support from his dad, but hearing it so clearly articulated in front of everyone made him feel seen and valued. Michael continued, addressing not just Carol but the entire cabin. "What happened here today isn't just about my son, it's about how we treat one another. Every individual deserves respect, regardless of their background or appearance." Passengers nodded in agreement, the murmurs of support growing louder. Carol's defiance began to crumble under the weight of collective scrutiny. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat as she faced the realization that her actions had drawn condemnation from those around her. In that moment, it became clear that Michael was not merely advocating for Ethan, he was standing up for the values of kindness and respect that should prevail in society. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted, and it was evident that Carol's prejudiced behavior would not go unchallenged. As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. The tension that had once filled the air was now replaced with a sense of relief and camaraderie among the passengers. Michael's words had resonated deeply, prompting many to reflect on the importance of treating others with respect and dignity. Ethan, feeling a surge of confidence and pride, exchanged glances with his father. Michael placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, silently acknowledging how well his son had handled the difficult situation. The young boy felt empowered, knowing he had stood strong in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, Carol sat in her seat, her expression one of shame and humiliation. She avoided eye contact with the other passengers, realizing that her actions had not only affected Ethan, but had also caused discomfort for everyone on board. As the realization sank in, she began to understand the impact of her prejudice and the importance of empathy. Once the plane safely touched down and the wheels screeched against the runway, Michael and Ethan prepared to disembark. Several passengers turned to Ethan, offering words of encouragement. "You did great, kid," one man said, smiling warmly. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Another passenger handed Ethan a small note, which read, "Keep being yourself. The world needs more people like you." Ethan's heart swelled with gratitude as he tucked the note into his pocket, feeling a renewed sense of hope and belonging. As the other passengers began to exit, Carol remained seated, her head down, grappling with the consequences of her behavior. The weight of the confrontation lingered heavily on her shoulders, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed an opportunity to embrace kindness instead of judgment. In the days that followed, Michael and Ethan became advocates for respect and understanding, sharing their experience to inspire others. They participated in community events, speaking about the importance of standing up against prejudice and promoting compassion in everyday life. Their story served as a powerful reminder that even in challenging situations, courage and kindness can prevail. Michael looked at his son, proud of how he had navigated such a difficult moment with grace. "Always remember, Ethan," he said, "it's not just about what happens to you, it's about how you respond and the lessons you take from it. Let this experience inspire you to treat others with kindness, no matter their background." Ethan nodded, his spirit unbroken and his heart full. The incident on the flight had not just been a lesson in resilience, it had become a catalyst for change, reminding everyone involved that compassion and understanding could triumph over prejudice. As they stepped off the plane, they carried with them the hope that their story would inspire others to choose kindness in their own lives, one interaction at a time.